and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Gonna take a moment, guys. I'm been having a minute of a day. Lots going around me. Barking dogs, very unsavory characters renting a B&B near me. Problems with very unhinged people on social media. Stuff that I can't always make sense of. Not that I'm doing a trauma or a therapy session with you all, but, sometimes want to let you all know that I'm human and things do bother me. However, let's get into it today. First, you know what? If you come listen to my jokes, you listen to my stories, you listen to what I have to tell you, I appreciate you. I love your comments. I appreciate all the new listeners. My God, almost 3,000 people follow the show. I feel extremely honored about that. If you're new and you're just discovering me, there's so much for you to catch up on, so many conversations. Please go ahead, keep sending your emails, your inquiries, keep engaging. That's how we keep discussions for the community moving forward. And if you have been getting something out of my show, if you've learned something new or you find a little bit more clarity on your journey, there is a link in the show description where you can support the show directly. It does help me keep this work going, and it does create a space for more conversations that truly matter. All right. Now that I'm done with a little bit of that self-aggrandizing behavior, and I know everybody will chuckle about that, but you know what? If I don't promote myself, guys, I'm sorry. And if I don't on occasion get some support from some of the fabulous people that do, it makes it harder for me to do all this. But anyways, today I want to get into something I see quite often. As a matter of fact, somebody reached out. So this show is actually inspired by her. But I see this type of behavior all the time. And it's not just in my sessions with people, but it is in the lifestyle and in day-to-day regular relationships, work, family. What I'm talking about is people-pleasing. And it's a behavior that often gets confused for kindness or helpfulness or just being overly cooperative. But in reality, it usually comes from a place of fear, anxiety, and sometimes survival. And this isn't about being polite or thoughtful. People-pleasing is about giving up your own needs to avoid discomfort, rejection, or even conflict, right? It's a learned behavior. It's one that can quietly erode trust and communication and consent, especially in other spaces where power and vulnerability are part of this connection. And quite honestly, I'm going to link this to what happened today. I've had a couple people that have contacted me a little bit are doing passive-aggressive behavior or outright aggressive behavior towards me. Now, if you've known me or worked with me or listened to me or read anything I've written, even if people don't agree with me, that's fine. The world's not going to agree with me, and I don't expect it to. I don't know everything about trauma. I still keep learning. I keep going to classes and all of those things. However, when I am talking about something specific when I write or talk, what's interesting is when people start to or attempt to hijack that conversation and they want to introduce a new element that I'm not discussing because it's about their own narrative. The reality here is that I don't bend the knee. I don't give into conflict or not get involved in conflict because I'm worried about my public persona. That's not it. If you don't know me, I don't do that. That's not who I am. If I say something, I stand by it. If I've made a mistake, I absolutely 100% will apologize, correct it, and move forward. But if I'm going to get into a discussion about something, I'm going to stand by it because I've written it, and I'm not going to back down unless I've made some really grandiose error. Other than that, we don't, right? So I tend not to fall in this behavioral type that I'm going to talk about a little bit more today. Again, sorry, I know I'm diverting a little bit, but it does help you understand about people-pleasing behavior, because if I was a people-pleaser, I would have acquiesced to a couple of these weird comments or some very strange emails I got that I don't know, can't even get into it, but it's not hard to find. All right, so let's talk about this and what this really is about, right? What are we actually saying when we say people-pleasing? Because let's be honest here, on the surface, it doesn't sound all that bad. Most of us were raised to believe that being agreeable or maybe flexible and helpful is part of being a good person, a good human being, right? There's nothing wrong with caring about others. I do that, and a lot of others do, or, giving them support or even being generous. But people-pleasing isn't really about care. It's about connection. It's about anxiety. It's about fear of rejection, fear of disappointing someone, fear of not being needed, or worse, not being wanted. It's a behavior rooted in survival, not choice, and it usually starts long before kink ever enters the picture. Now, when I'm working with people, I often see this pattern take shape in early relationships, especially with caregivers or authority figures, when love and safety is tied to performance, when someone has to be the peacemaker or carry the emotional weight of others just to avoid chaos or punishment, that behavior begins to stick. It becomes second nature, and you learn to, read a room fast. You stay quiet when you want to speak. You say yes when your body's screaming no. And it's all because staying safe is meant to be staying small and unseen. And then people bring in that same nervous system into adult relationships. Into the lifestyle here, it's a little bit different, because in these spaces where power dynamics are front and center, consent is supposed to be clear. But here's the problem. People-pleasing doesn't just go away when the playroom opens up or someone calls you sir or baby girl or any other name that we've got, right? That survival pattern follows you in. And because because we're in the lifestyle, often we look at these things that celebrate service and obedience or leadership. People-pleasing doesn't just blend in, it gets praised, it gets rewarded. Worse, it can get reinforced. And you see someone going along with everything, staying agreeable, never really rocking the boat. And from the outside, it can look like they're invested, devoted, committed. But the truth is, they might be disappearing in the total plain sight, so they're not really seen. We do see a lot of this behavior in local communities as well. I hear about this from volunteers at local dungeons or DMs that are, anywhere I can really think of that people have really reached out. But here's where we bring in the actual term for this, right? Because this is actually a behavioral term. It's part of our response system. It's called fawning. And no, it's not really some quirky term for collar catalog, right? Fawning is what happens when your body chooses appeasement as the safest option, right? It's when our nervous system is telling us, I will do whatever it takes to avoid being abandoned, rejected, or harmed. It's not a personality trait. It's not just being nice. It's a trauma response. It's one of the ways our body learns to survive when, power feels one-sided and boundaries haven't really been respected in our past, and we don't know what really healthy boundaries look like moving forward. Now, when that behavior shows up in the lifestyle where trust and, boundaries and consent and communication are supposed to be, non-negotiable, we know we need these things, it quietly chips away at the very things we care about the most. And that's why this conversation matters, because if we don't talk about what people-pleasing actually is, we risk confusing it for connection. And that doesn't serve anyone on either side of the slash or anybody inside of the lifestyle in general, right? So let me break this down a little bit more. Fawning is what happens when someone learns, usually early on, that the safest way to exist in a relationship is to meet everyone else's needs first. You put yourself second. You manage other people's emotions, you smooth over tension, you keep the peace even when it costs you something. It's not about generosity, it's about thoughtfulness. It's about survival, right? Fawning shows up when your nervous system gets the message that saying no might lead to abandonment, rejection, conflict, anything that's going to make you feel discomfort. And you definitely don't feel equipped to handle. So instead of setting a boundary, you swallow your discomfort. You go along. You agree. You become easy. You become convenient. And from the outside, it looks like you're fine. But inside, you're disappearing inside of the person you are. You're disconnecting from your own wants, your limits, and eventually your sense of self, right? I've had clients tell me they didn't even realize they were doing it until it looked back at a dynamic and couldn't remember the last time they asked for anything. Or they even felt, they feel burnt out, they feel resentful, they couldn't figure out why. And this is what happens when your body's trying to, keep you safe. But all of that comes at the cost of its authenticity. And let's be clear about something. This isn't something that just only shows up in submissives. I've seen this with dominants. They can fall into this pattern too. They avoid hard conversations. They ignore their limits to keep the connection going. They stay in dynamics that aren't aligned anymore. Not because they want to, but because they feel responsible for somebody else's feelings. That's still people-pleasing. It just looks different when it's wrapped in control or leadership or even authority. But underneath it, it's still the same pattern. It's the same fear, the same disconnect from the self. Fawning doesn't care what role you hold. It cares about keeping you safe. And when safety has been tied to agreeability, invisibility, or even self-sacrificing, fawning is the strategy that steps in to, get the job done. But the truth is, the strategy can't build any intimacy for you. It can't sustain real connection. It definitely can't carry a healthy dynamic for very long either. And that's something you have to start considering. So how does this all show up in the lifestyle, Chris? Well, that's a good question. Now, if we understand that fawning is about staying safe by keeping others happy, what is this going to look like here? Well, the short answer is it's everywhere. It's in the submissive who never says no, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they're unsure. They go along with things because the idea of disappointing their dominant feels worse than the discomfort they're trying to push down. It shows up in the dominant who avoids addressing behavior that crosses a line. They let bratty behavior slide, not because they enjoy it, because they're afraid that speaking up might create tension or push their partner away. So, they stay quiet. They tolerate it. And underneath it all, they feel increasingly disconnected from the role they're trying to hold. It shows up in new folks who just want to be accepted. They jump into seams, they don't fully understand or aren't equipped to do. They override that gut feeling that something might be too soon, too fast, and too unfamiliar. But instead of checking in or slowing down, they say yes anyway. Not out of confidence or consent, but out of fear that they'll be seen as difficult, ungrateful, or not lifestyle enough. Right? And look, if you've ever said yes to something and later regretted it, this might be touching a nerve right now, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you did something wrong. It just means that there was something worth paying attention to. People-pleasing in kink is sneaky because so much of the lifestyle celebrates things like giving and devotion, obedience, authority, caretaking, dominance. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things when they're coming from a place of choice. And we need to understand that. But when's it fawning? Well, it's not devotion. It's not service. It's self-protection disguised as consent. And that's why understanding this behavior matters, because if we can't tell the difference between a yes that's empowered and a yes that's anxious, we miss the whole point of what consent and power exchange are supposed to be about. So how do we look at this whole consent versus compliance part? Well, then let's slow it down here for a second. This is where everything we talk about starts to pull together and where it starts to matter the most. Consent isn't just about saying yes. It's not a checkbox that so many people want to quickly move through. It's not a script we memorize. It's about capacity. It's about having the freedom to say no without fear of punishment or disconnection. It's about feeling safe enough to be honest, not just with your partner, but with yourself. And when someone's people-pleasing, that freedom is gone. It doesn't matter how much negotiation happened, how clear the rules were, or how beautiful the dynamic looked from the outside. If the person didn't feel like they could say no, or ask for something else, or just pause and check in with themselves, then what's happening isn't consent, it's compliance. Fawning makes everything look smooth. It makes someone seem agreeable, easy, low maintenance, but it's not real. It's a mask. And that mask is here, that's put in place to avoid discomfort, conflict, rejection. That mask is working hard to keep someone safe, often without even realizing it. And in kink, that's a dangerous place for the mask to get unnoticed. Because we're not just playing with preferences here, we're playing with power. And if power isn't met with honest, grounded, enthusiastic consent, then what we're doing starts to feel hollow, or worse, it starts to feel unsafe. And power without choice is not power exchange, it's control, it's coercion. And even if no one meant for it to go there, that's the worst part. Now, I've worked with people who gave the green light over and over, but were disassociating the entire time, who smiled through scenes and protocols that left them feeling small, shut down, and ashamed. And I've worked with their partners too, people who thought everything was fine, who never knew anything was wrong until the relationship completely collapsed under the weight of what was never spoken. And that's the moment I say, people-pleasing mimics consent, but it robs it of its meaning. It creates an illusion of agreement without the presence of self. And there is nothing healthy, intimate, or empowering about any of that. And if you've ever found yourself saying yes while something in your chest was tightening, if you stayed quiet because you were scared of being too much or not enough, if you've ever felt exhausted after scenes or interactions when you were supposed to feel affirming, this is the part that you need to sit with. This is the part where you ask, was I choosing that or was I coping? Because if we don't make a space to ask those questions, we start building relationships on silence instead of trust. And no dynamic, no matter how structured, how romantic, how well-intended, right? It cannot survive long on silence. So where does this all come from? For most people, people-pleasing didn't just show up. It's learned, it's practiced, it's reinforced. And for a lot of this, it's rooted in our childhood experiences. Maybe you grew up in a home where love, it had strings attached. It was conditional, where affection was earned, it wasn't given. Maybe you had a parent who was unpredictable or emotionally reactive, and keeping the peace meant staying small, quiet, and agreeable. Maybe it was more subtle, always being told to be polite, to not make a fuss, or to think of others before yourself. And somewhere in all of that, your instincts got pushed aside. You learned to read the room before you ever read yourself. Look, if you've got trauma in your past, especially relationship type trauma or familial trauma, then people-pleasing wasn't just a habit. It's how you survived, right? It's your nervous system finding a way to stay safe in unsafe situations. It's the body that remembers that even long after that, those people are gone. That's why these patterns are so hard to shake, because on some level they once worked, but what kept you safe back then might be holding you back now. And this is why it's a problem in kink, because if kink celebrates the things like surrender and service, devotion and control, they're beautiful parts of the lifestyle when they're rooted in clarity and choice. But if you don't know why you're saying yes or what you're saying yes to, then you're not submitting, you're surviving. That yes might not be an act of trust. It might be an old pattern running the show, one that says, if I just give them what they want, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll be loved. Maybe I won't be left. And that's where things start to break down, because when someone's people-pleasing, they're not actually present. They're managing. They're masking. They're giving you the version of themselves they think you want, not one that's real. And for DOMs, that matters too. Because if your partner's just performing, if they're saying yes out of fear or habit, then you're not in control. You're in a scene with a ghost, and it might look right, it might sound right, but the connection's not there. And over time, that kind of dynamic eats away at both of you. And this is how DS turns into a performance instead of a relationship, instead of connection, and instead of something alive and mutual and honest. And that's when kink loses its power, when honesty leaves the room. So what do we do about all this? Well, it really does start with getting honest, and not just with your partner, but the worst person, yourself. You have to ask why you're saying yes. Is it because you genuinely are excited, you're curious, or maybe a little nervous, but you're still feeling grounded and willing? Or are you saying yes because you're afraid of what will happen if you say no? That's the difference between choice and fear, between consent and coping. One of the simplest tools is learning to pause. You don't have to answer everything right away. Practice saying it. Let me think about this for a minute. Can we come back to this? Give yourself space to check in, not just with your thoughts, but with your body. How does it actually feel to say yes? Is there ease? Is there tension? And for the dominants out there, this matters just as much to you. Check in. Ask twice. Don't just listen for consent here. Listen for truth. Listen for capacity. Watch your partner's body. Listen to the pauses between their words. Ask questions. Do you really want this? Is there anything you've been hesitating about? And make room for an honest answer. Because if your dynamic is only safe when everything goes smoothly, it's not really safe. It's fragile. And if you're someone who's using fawning, know this. Saying no might feel terrifying at first. You might feel guilty. You might second guess yourself. But that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That means you're growing. And that kind of work, slowing down, checking in, building internal safety, that's where the real intimacy starts. And that's not just in kink, but in any connection worth keeping. People pleasing here isn't a fawn, it's not a flaw, it's a response. And it's one that's probably kept you safe for a long point in your life. But when it starts running the show in your relationships or in whatever capacity those take shape in, especially in kink, it takes away the very thing the lifestyle is meant for: choice, intimacy, desire, and truth. We talk a lot about this space, about surrender and service and control and structure, right? We talk about all these things, but without honesty and agency, it's all performance. And if we want our dynamics to hold real weight, then we have to be brave enough to look at the behaviors that feel automatic, even when they've been with us for a long time, especially when they've been praised. So here's my question for a lot of you. When you say yes, do you trust that it's coming from a part of you that's choosing, or the part that's afraid? And I want you to kind of sit with that today, right? If you're not sure, that's not a failure. It's a starting point. All right? Look, I want you to feel free to share this episode if it really resonated. Maybe somebody else needs to hear this. I want you to please, if you're following me on Spotify or Apple, click on the ratings so my show can continue to grow, right? I can keep it for free like I've been doing for 4 years. All I ask you is to rate me 5 stars so I can keep this, allows other people to keep finding my show, right? I do want to let you know I have some upcoming exciting interviews coming. Somebody from the leather community, she talks very passionately about mental health. I'm going to be speaking with Red Warrior soon. Hopefully before Beyond Leather happens in Florida. We'll see what I can do. It's all about coordinating schedules. I also want to let you know, listen, I do have a book out. It is called Tangled Desires, the intersection between BDSM and psychology. Yes, it's a little repetitive. It's my first book, right? But you can find it wherever you get books. Your Kindle, or if you want a hard copy or a print version, there is one as well. I do have a Substack out for those who don't follow me on Fetlife. That will be in the description of the show as well. You can find me there. You can listen to my conversations and some of my writings. So let me know what you thought about the show today, what thoughts are going on in your head. Let's keep the discussion going, right? You can contact me on X, through my website. You can contact me through Gmail, thekinkperspective@gmail.com. All of these different spaces you can find me, right? And if you have something you'd like me to look into, or if you have a really interesting story that I haven't covered yet and you'd like to bring it onto my show, send me an email. Let's sit down and have a conversation. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.